I've been a fan of the Resident Evil games since the very beginning, and whilst it was a little strange seeing Resi 4 become an over-the-shoulder action game, it ended up becoming one of my best PS2 games, and it's one I can still easily play again today. When the remake was announced, I was excited to get stuck back into the reimagined classic. The Resi 2 remake was phenomenal, and my only hope was that the Resi 4 remake could at the very least match it. But did the Resi 4 remake meet my expectations? And did it do the original game justice? Welcome to Survival Horror Files. Let's discuss. One thing you could argue about is if the content changes in these modern Resi remakes make the games better. Resi 2 had some cut or modified content, which is certainly up for debate. Resi 3 needs no debate, that was straight up butchered. But what about Resi 4? There was cut content in the form of a major boss battle, and some locations were omitted or drastically altered. But was it enough of a big deal? I've played a lot of Resi 4 in my time, the most recent being the PS3 edition, but I couldn't remember everything from the back of my hand. In that sense, I didn't fully realise or take note of that many changes, bar some more obvious scenes. For example, the classic scenes remained largely untouched, such as the opening village siege. What isn't broken doesn't need to be fixed, which I thought was wise, and instead offered a big graphical update to enhance the scene somewhat. And in many cases we saw minor adjustments, so it wasn't a case of just being a graphical update throughout. For example, behind the church, where there once was a puzzle, is completely removed, and you can now climb up onto a new platform. Keeping the environments almost identical, but with some subtle changes that players of the original game will notice, was a nice touch. But of course, we also got completely redesigned or new environments, which I really enjoyed, as a straight up graphical remake doesn't always do it for me. I think developers have to gamble and try to find that balance of old and new. The original Resident Evil remake is a perfect example of this, keeping the same mansion but adding a ton of new locations and altering puzzles and little details in the remade sections. Overall, Resi 4 did a great job in finding that balance. It felt more like a fresh experience that wasn't just the same game all over again with a modern lick of paint. Some may say that Resi 4 didn't need a remake, and that's true when you consider that the PS1 games were much more worthy. Even something like Code Veronica, which I find a bit flawed in its original state, would benefit a lot more than a game like Resi 4, which is still considered a masterpiece to this day. But I'll happily accept a remake as long as the effort has been put in to create something special, and I strongly believe Resi 4 Remake has done that. The only thing I'll say about this remake is that it's probably not as inspired as the remakes of 1 and 2. Beyond the new use of the knife to deflect and stealth attack enemies, I don't feel like there was anything too groundbreaking. There was nothing like Mr. X chasing you around the police station in the Resi 2 remake. They perhaps even missed the chance of doing that again, but with the big cheese. The remake was more of the same, but with the modern survival horror elements that has been present in 7, Village, and the remakes for 2 and 3. And that leads me to my final point. I feel as though this style is starting to get a little tired. Whilst I would happily accept a more survival horror take on a Resi 5 remake, I feel as though I'm getting a little bored of the formula now. It's becoming a little too predictable and safe by this point. It'll be interesting to see where Resi 9 takes the franchise before we see another remake. Perhaps those next two titles will be closely linked gameplay wise. But I'm sure we'll still see the over-the-shoulder modern survival horror gameplay for a few more games yet, as it's still very well done. It's all just becoming a bit predictable and repetitive for me by this point, and I'm not that excited for another remake just yet. I finished the Resi 4 remake and I was just kinda done with it. I must have finished the original about 4 or 5 times, and the Resi 2 remake twice with each character. I couldn't get enough of those games. But with Resi 4 Remake, it was just a really well made game that I enjoyed, but didn't feel like it grabbed me quite as much as those other games did. That's not to say anything was bad or that I disliked parts of the experience, I just simply didn't get as hyped for it this time around, which I'm actually quite disappointed in myself for admitting. I wish Resi 4 Remake still had that magic, but unfortunately it's a game that will be low on my list to replay again. Overall, I think it's a great remake, and one that can stand strong side by side with the original. I don't think it outright replaces the original, even with its dated design. I still think it's a very strong game to play before or after you give the remake a try. I think one of the main problems for me was that I went into the remake having seen the wealth of 10 out of 10 masterpiece reviews, but honestly, if I had to rate the game myself, I'd say it was a solid 8 out of 10. Not that I would dispute a 9 or 10, as I can see why some may rate it that highly, but for me it just didn't grab me enough to warrant anything higher than an 8. And like I said, it's a solid 8, I was still really impressed with the game. Let's see what the future holds with further Resi remakes, and if they can continue to keep the formula fresh. What did you think of the Resi 4 remake? Are you excited to see more Resi games get the remake treatment? Let us know down in the comments below, and subscribe to stay tuned on the latest videos from Survival Horror Files.